Today we're going to be removing the transmission from a 2014 Ford Escape. The model that we have here is the 1.6 turbo with the all-wheel drive. With that said, this process is the same for the Escape from the years 2013 all the way to 2019. Really the biggest difference is depending on the motor, you're going to have a different bolt pattern on the bell housing on the engine to the transmission. In addition, if you have the all-wheel drive versus the front-wheel drive, there's just a little bit more work that you got to do for the all-wheel drive. But it's a pretty straightforward process. Some of the things are kind of tedious, but let me show you how you can very easily do this yourself at home. To get started, we're going to be removing the wipers here because we need to remove the cowl here to give us some more room. So just pop that cap off, and this is just going to be a 15 mil. And we'll take the wiper arm off. Then remove the retaining clips, and you just got 4 or 5 of them across the front here. So just take a screwdriver or something in there and just pry them out. And it looks like we are missing a couple over here, but you should have a few more over on that side. Then remove the 2 T25 Torx here, and then we'll set our reservoir to the side. Then we should be able to pry this up and it should pop off. Then to remove this lower cowl, it's just held on by a couple 8 mil bolts. So I think we got 2 here, then 2 over there. And we should be able to pop this out. Then remove the engine cover. Remove the battery cover. And disconnect our battery, and we're just going to have 2 10 mil here. Then we're going to remove the air filter and the throttle body hoses here. So just disconnect a couple of these vacuum hoses here. So on this one here, just push underneath and it'll pop those out, and then it should snap off. And on this one here, just squeeze down there. And remove this plug. And to get this off, we're just going to have a couple hose clamps here. So just use an 8 mil or a flathead screwdriver. Then to remove the air filter box, just lift up that flap and it should pop right out. Now we're going to remove the battery and the tray here. So just on the side here, just pry off a little bit and this thing should slide straight up. It looks like we have another 10 mil right here holding the battery down. Then remove the battery. And to remove the battery tray, we have a couple 10 mil in here, but first we need to remove this valve. So it looks like there's a T25 there. Then the rest of this stuff should just pop off. And some of these little bolts and screws during this process, sometimes it helps just to put them back in the same spot so you don't forget where they went when you go to install this. And the tray should slide right out. Now we're ready to remove this bracket, and it looks like we just have 4 15 mil bolts there. But first you need to make sure you disconnect some of these electrical connectors on the side here. So just pop those off, and there's another one down there, and we'll zip those 4 bolts out. Then our bracket should come out. This isn't required, but real quick, I'm going to get this thing out of the way here because it's in the way here for me to record this. So just pop these off. And it looks like we have a couple negatives down there, so 13 and a 10. Now we're ready to remove the shift lever down here, and we're going to also remove that bracket. And I forgot to mention this earlier, just make sure you have the transmission in neutral. And to get this popped off, just take a flathead screwdriver or something and gently pry up. Then we'll just have 2 10 mil bolts there. And you can just set that out of the way. Next, we're going to remove this radiator hose bracket, and you just got a 10 mil there and one on the other side, I believe. I'm going to be using this S-style wrench because it's kind of a tight spot here, but just maneuver your wrench in there. A regular one, you can get it out as well. And if that stud's spinning, that's okay. Just take the whole thing out. Then to get the bracket out of there, you just have some push pins for the hose, and then it looks like there's electrical wire going through there as well. Just pop those off. And this is where it'll help to have a long pliers to go down here and release this push pin on the bottom. I don't know who designed this, but it's in a terrible spot where it's holding that wiring in there. Alright, so once you got those popped off, hopefully this bracket slides out of here. Alright, so here's our bracket finally removed. So these are those 2 bolts that we first loosened up. You have a push pin over here on the side holding some wiring over here. Push pin up here holding a radiator hose. Another push pin here holding more electrical wiring. Then you have some more wiring going through here. You just push that up and this should slide right out. Next, remove all of these retainers here holding in that wiring on the side of the transmission. Then also remove this electrical connector here. So just push this in, it should pull straight back. And that's just on the side of the transmission right there. Now we're going to remove the 2 top engine to transmission bolts. And there's really no easy way for me to get in there and record this. But what I typically do is take this 13 mil with an extension for this one on the back. And you can slide it right there underneath those hoses. Then on this one over here, you're going to need to get a swivel attachment because it's in a bad spot and it'll swivel up and you'll be able to get it right here. They're not really that great of locations, but you just kind of maneuver your sockets around there and eventually you'll find a spot that'll fit. Then to get this bolt out, you can reach down in here. And there's the first one. It's just going to be a 13 mil, so then we'll remove that other one. And this is the setup we'll use for this front one here. And there's the second one. Then we'll disconnect these two hoses coming into our transmission cooler here. And they just have some hose clamps on the end. And you will have a little fluid come out of here. Just get a towel and wipe it up. Then we'll install a cap here to prevent this thing from leaking. Then we'll remove that other one. And the last thing we'll do up here before we go down underneath the vehicle is we're going to disconnect that wiring harness on the side of the transmission case. And I can't get down there with my camera to show you, so I'll show you here on our other transmission how you can get that popped off. So this is the wiring connection I was talking about. So what you're going to do is gently pry out just a little bit here to pop that up and push that all the way forward. And that plug should slide out like that. After you set your emergency brake and put some wheel chocks in the back and you have your vehicle supported with some jack stands, remove that underbody shield, and it's just held together by some push pins and a couple bolts. Then we'll drain the transmission fluid, and you just got a plug right here. Drain the oil, and we're also going to remove the oil filter up here. And on this 1.6, we also need to remove this oil cooler, and there's just a bolt back there. On some of the engines, it's not required for you to remove that, but on this 1.6, it is. After you get that cleaned off with the wire brush, put a ratchet on here, and this is going to be an 11 mil. Make sure you obviously have a drain pan down here as well. And when it starts to become a slow trickle, just put our plug back on there. We don't need to get it all out of there, just get the majority of it out. Then we'll drain the oil as well. And when that's done draining, just tighten this plug back up. And don't forget when you go to reinstall the new transmission to fill this thing back up with oil to put a new gasket in that drain plug there as well. Then we'll remove the oil filter. To get this oil cooler off, you're going to need to get a 12 mil hex. So this is the one I'm going to be using here, and it's the length of 3 inches. If you just use one of these like this, it will not be long enough to fit back in there. So just make sure you have one of these. I'll put a link in the description to this set here, but this will get threaded right into the inside of where that oil filter goes, and you'll be able to crank this off. Then we'll be able to set the cooler aside. And it's not on there very tight. Once you get it broke loose, you should be able to hand thread that out of there. And that's the piece you're going to be removing. Then you should be able to wiggle that a little bit and it should break it loose. Then just set it to the side. Now we're ready to remove both of the half shafts. We'll start here with the driver's side. First we'll remove our wheel, and this is going to be a 19 mil. Now we're ready to remove the axle nut, and that's just going to be a 32 mil. We'll first put a little PV blaster on there. And if you're going to be using a breaker bar instead of an impact, just make sure you put a screwdriver or something in here to prevent that from turning. Remove this 8 mil bolt here holding our brake hose, and we'll kind of set this aside. You just don't want to put an unnecessary bind when you pivot this to get the axle out. Now we're ready to remove the ball joint. You just have a pinch bolt here, so we'll remove this pinch bolt, and this is just going to be 18 mil. Just put a little PV blaster on there because sometimes those are corroded, and that should zip right off. Then we'll separate the ball joint here from the knuckle. Then remove this little retainer up here. We'll put a little bit more PV blaster in there to help that break loose, because sometimes those bolts get stuck in there. To remove our axle out of there, I'm just going to use this hub puller here. And what you do is just thread this on there, and just make sure you put some washers on here so you don't tear up your lug nuts. Then that should push the axle out on the other side. You can also hammer on that a little bit, but you got to be careful so you don't beat up the threads. Now we're ready to pull the half shaft out of the transmission. Just make sure you're not overextending any of these joints. And what you can do is just take a screwdriver or pry bar up against the transmission and gently pop it out. Alright, so then just repeat that same process on the passenger side. The only difference on the passenger side half shaft is there's also a bracket, and I'll give you a picture of that. You need to make sure you remove that bracket first, then you'll be able to easily get the axle out on the other side. Here's that bracket, and you just got two 13 mil nuts on there. Then to remove the half shaft on this side, just take a screwdriver or your pry bar here, and you're going to pry straight back. The next thing we need to do here is remove this splash shield. You just got a couple 7mm bolts over here and a couple push pins over there. The reason we need to remove this is because we have a support bar in the back that we need to remove. Sometimes these get stuck on here. You can easily replace these, and I got a bunch of these, so I'm just going to tear this thing off here with the pliers. And remove a couple more down here. Now we're ready to remove the support bar back there. So if you just pry that splash shield out of the way, you can see those two 10mm bolts back there. We need to remove those two, then we have two more on the bottom. And this bracket should slide out. Next, we're going to remove this tube that goes up there to the turbo. So you're just going to have a clamp here, and you can use a 7mm here, a couple nuts here, and I believe those are a 13, and the clamp up there. Then you should be able to remove this. In order to get a little bit more access in there to get our starter, I'm going to remove this tube. So we just have another 7mm clamp up there, and it goes up there to the throttle body on the front of the motor. And then it looks like we just have a nut here holding this brace onto the transmission. So remove the starter, and it's kind of in a bad spot where I'm not going to be able to record this, but here's your starter on the front of the motor here. You're just going to have a control wire on the side there, and you're also going to have the positive battery terminal. So we need to remove both of those terminals. Then after we get that, then we're going to remove a bolt up top here on this side. Then we're going to go underneath, and we're going to remove the bottom two on the bottom. Then the starter should come right out. All right, so we removed the top one. So now we'll come back down to the bottom here, and we'll remove these two. All right, so there's the bottom bolt. And we got one more up there. I'm going to need to use this little stubby ratchet. If you don't have one, you're just going to have to be patient up in there, but it is a tight fit. Okay, so there's the third bolt. In this middle part of this starter, there's a 10mm nut on there holding that plastic shield on there. So we need to take that off so this whole plastic shield comes off as well. It's probably going to get hung up on all these hoses and wiring and all this stuff down here. But eventually just finagle it out of there like that. Then reach up into that hole where you just removed the starter. Then there's going to be a little protective shield in there. Just gently pull that out. And this is what that looks like. And it's just going to sit on the side of the engine like that. All right, now that we got the starter removed, now we have access to those torque converter nuts in there to remove. In order to do this, you need to make sure you put an 18 mil socket over here in a ratchet and only turn the motor clockwise. And what you're doing is you're slowly turning it until you see a visible access out of that starter hole to remove that nut. And let me show you here on my other transmission of what we're dealing with down there so you can get an idea, because, you know, again, it's going to be hard for me to video this. All right, to give you an example of what we're dealing with down here, here's a transmission out of the vehicle, and here's that starter hole that we just removed the starter. There's your torque converter, so your flex plate's going to sit on this side of the motor. As you turn that crankshaft on the motor clockwise, you're going to slowly rotate it around until you see that you have access to remove those nuts on there. And you're going to have 4 of them. That's just a 15 mil. Once you have access to remove that, then just simply zip that off. And before you get done with this, make sure you make an index mark in here on one of those marks so you put this in the right orientation. That flex plate will only made up to this torque converter one way. Yeah, you can still get it done by trial and error if you forget to do that, but it'll just make your life a lot easier if you do that. Then just, you know, follow the process. Keep rotating the motor around until you get all 4 of those removed. All right, so just give you a quick example of what you're doing here. So just rotate it a little bit. Go back up there, see if you see that the bolt is exposed in that hole. If it's not, keep rotating it around till you see it. Okay, so now I see that my bolt is exposed. So the next thing we're going to do is figure out a way to wedge this wrench or this ratchet, whatever you have over here, against the frame of the body over here. This obviously is easier if you have somebody helping you. You can just have them come over here and hold it while you're cranking it down. But if you don't, just wedge it against something in here. Then you can go back up there and you can remove the torque converter nuts. So that's the setup right there that I'm going to use. Then come back up here, take your 13 mil, and you should have access up here to get down in there on that nut. And these are going to be on here very tight, so you're probably going to need some extra leverage. So what I'm going to use is just this extra bar that I have here, just to break it loose. Then you should be able to easily remove it. Then once you feel that it's loose in there, just take your hand down in there and remove it off the rest of the way. And just like this is how I hold that underneath there. So make sure I have the 2 fingers on the bottom like that to support it so it doesn't fall down. Now obviously it's more important when you're installing this because you don't want it to fall down in there. We are removing this transmission, so it's okay if it drops down there, but if you're installing it and you do that, then you're going to have a situation on your hand to get that nut out. So then just repeat that same process for all 4 of these torque converter nuts. Now we're ready to remove the transfer case, and if you have the front wheel drive only, you can skip to later chapter, but this is for the all-wheel drive version, so we must remove this. In order to do that, we've got a couple different braces or brackets we have to remove. So remove this, remove these 2 nuts over here on that converter bracket, I think is what that is. And we also have one up here we need to remove. And we also need to remove the rear drive shaft. In order to remove the rear drive shaft, it's going to be hard for me to get up in there, but I'll give you a picture. It's just a couple Torx bolts that we have to remove, and we'll zip those out. Then we'll come back here, and then we'll remove these as well. All right, so this is the setup I'm going to be using. I just got a T45 on the end. I got a longer extension than I have my impact. And what you can do here is once you remove one, just rotate the drive shaft a little bit, remove the other, and keep going around until you remove all of them. And this is what you're going to be removing down there. So you got 3 sets of these, and they do have a little bit of stuff in there to keep them in there. So it's going to feel like it's still on there, but just gently tug it and it'll pop right out. So just go ahead and remove the rest of those. All right, so there was the 3rd one. So we should just be able to pull this back and it should pop out. After you remove those bolts, if the drive shaft didn't immediately pop loose, what you can do is take a hammer and come in here and hit on that mating surface, and eventually it will pop loose. Next thing we're going to do here is remove this heat shield up here, and there's just going to be 3 8mm bolts on the top. there's the first one, then just remove the other two. And that third one back there is tucked up pretty far in there. It's in a terrible spot. You're probably going to need just a little small open end 8mm to get in there, because there's not enough room in there for your ratchet. But once you get those removed, then you should be able to slide this heat shield out. Now I'm ready to remove the lower transmission mount here. So we just got a couple 15. So that one there, here, and I believe there's one in the back there as well. And just pay attention to the sizes. So you're gonna have a couple different sizes. These two smaller one's there, one's there. And I believe the one on the back is another smaller one. Then that bolt in there, those are gonna be your larger ones. You might need to use a ratcheting wrench here as well, because you just don't have enough clearance. And then when you remove that last bolt, this should slide right out. Next, we need to remove this exhaust support bracket here. So we just got, I believe those are 13 mil. So we need to remove both of those over there, the nut over here, and the stud on this one. Then that bracket should come out. Now, if yours are as corroded as mine are, make sure you use a wire brush and some PV blaster in there first, just to make sure we can get those off. Well, it looks like those are a 15 and then those are a 13 up top. And depending on which motor you have, I believe they put a different setup in the other motors, but on this 1.6, this is what you're going to have. And to get these studs off, you're going to need to use one of these E7s. And it's just that inverted Torx there. And I'll put a link in the description to where you can get this. But we need to get these off as well. And of course, it looks like it snapped off there. So we're just going to have to cut those off. And we'll get those off over there. Alright, so after we get those cut off, and I just use my M12 multi-tool and I just zipped it right off, then you should be able to come up top here and just pry this thing out of here. And sometimes you get lucky and these just pop off. Other times you just gotta gently pry against it on the top. There's not much leverage up there you can get on it, but eventually it will pop out. Now we're ready to remove this transfer case support bracket, and there's just going to be a 10 mil here, 10 mil there, then there's one over there going into the side of the motor. So there's the first one. And after you get that third one out, the bracket should slide right out. Now we're ready to remove the mounting bolts, and we have 3 right here, then we have 2 up top. The 2 up top are kind of a bear to get to, but if you use a shallow socket or an open end wrench, you can typically get them broke loose, then just hand thread them out. In order to get this first one off, and this is the hardest one to get off, I'm going to be using a little stubby 3/8 ratchet with the shallow 13 on there. So what you can do is set that up in there. Then take the longest wrench that you have, and you want to make sure you have that box end on the end, and you're going to set it on the end of your ratchet. Then you're going to use this for your leverage. And if that little heat shield up there gets in your way, just bend it up a little bit. So there, we broke it loose. It's still in there pretty tight, so we'll crank it a few more times. Alright, so then we should be able to ratchet the rest of that off. And we're not going to take it off all the way because that socket will get wedged in there. So hopefully that loosened it up enough where we can hand thread it, and it does feel like it's coming out. Alright, so there's the first one, then we'll remove the other one on the top as well. That one's a little bit easier. You can just reach around up top and you can just get it off with a ratchet. Now that we got it broke loose, we'll switch it out and we'll use our stubby again, so just so we have a little bit more leeway in there to ratchet that off. Alright, so we got the 2 hard ones out of the top. Now we'll just zip these 3 out. Alright, so as we're getting ready to remove this one, you're going to want to make sure you support this because you don't want it falling out on you. Alright, so once you get that last one out, then you should be able to pivot this thing out of there. One other thing I forgot about here, the reason why that transfer case isn't just popping out of there, is this vent hose needs to be disconnected. So right here is the top part. So you can just snap this piece off, then we'll just take that hose out with it. There is a connection on the top of the transfer case, but it's hard to get to. So I'm just going to loosen it up here, and hopefully it'll come out the bottom there. Alright, so after we disconnected that vent hose, now we should be able to slide this out of here. One last comment down here before we remove some of these bell housing bolts and get the transmission out of here. If you have the auto stop feature on your vehicle, you're going to have a little module on the side of the transmission here. Make sure you remove that. On this 2014, we don't have that, so we don't have to worry about it. I'm not sure which years have them, which don't, but just double check you don't have that module sitting there. If you do, you need to make sure we remove that. Now we're ready to remove the transmission bell housing bolts and also the transmission mount that's up top here. Before you do that, very important, you need to make sure you have that engine supported. I'm using my support bar back there. If you're not familiar with those, I do a separate video on that, on how those work. Check out the link above. If you don't have one of those, you can also use a jack and a board underneath your oil pan. Just make sure you go with the entire distance of the oil pan so you don't damage your oil pan. With that said, when you bring your transmission jack in and out underneath there, sometimes it's just a lot easier to use this up here. And these are relatively cheap. I think this thing was only like 65 bucks. So they're a good investment, but again, you have both of those options. So first we'll remove our 18 mil off this insulator. And this thing should slide out. Then we need to remove this bracket here, and it's just going to be 4 13 mil. And that bracket should come out as well. Okay, so now we have our transmission jack in place. You can see I have it supported up there. We'll probably put a chain on it here in a minute once we get it broke loose, but now that we have that sitting there, we're going to remove the bell housing bolts. And one note on those bell housing bolts, they are different sizes, so you need to make a note of that on the install. Starting with this top one, it is in a tight spot, but you should be able to get a wrench in there. I would use my ratcheting wrench, but there's just not enough room to get that in there, so we're gonna have to do the manual way here. And it doesn't look like that one's gonna come out all the way because that converter's in the way there. So we'll just make a note. When we push it this way, we should be able to slide it out. It looks like I did miss one bolt over here on the back side where that starter was at. So just make sure you remove that one as well. Okay, so now with everything removed, you're going to gently push it back that way. And if you remember those torque converter studs that are sticking out, we want to make sure we clear that first. And once we clear that, then we'll have enough leeway to drop the transmission down. All right, so once you see that you're past those studs in there, it's now safe to start lowering the transmission out of here. And just be careful as you're lowering this. There's going to be wires and hoses and all kinds of stuff in the way. Just make sure you're not tearing anything out when you're bringing this down. And if you did notice, I do have a strap here as well. That'll just help it stay on there in case it gets lopsided one way or the other. But a lot of these jacks, they are good about, you know, these different adjustments on these sides here as well, where you can, you know, pivot it one way or the other. But just take your time and this thing will come out of here. All right, so here's our end result. We got our transmission out. And as I mentioned there before, this may seem like a pretty intimidating job, but it's really not. Just pay attention to the detail and the pointers I mentioned during the video, and I guarantee you have just as good a success as we did here today. If you're interested in a follow-up, we're going to be doing a couple of follow-up videos on installing the new transmission in here and also doing a flex plate on this motor. If you're interested in that, see some of the links below. But I hope this video helps you guys out if you're in the market trying to think, do I sell my car? Do I go pay a shop $8,000 to do it? Now you can see you can very easily do this yourself at home. Just pay attention to the details I said in this video, and I guarantee you get the job done just like we did here today. So hopefully this helped you out. If it did, please give me the thumbs up. If you're interested in more content like this, please hit that subscribe. But again, I hope this helped you out, and thanks for watching.